everybody. I'm Elisa Sherman. I'm the CEO of Ellementa, and this is our casual Sunday coffee and tea and water for me at the moment.
I know. I was like, I think I'm water too.
I already had the coffee. This is the virtual book club where we get a chance to get up close and personal with authors of wellness books or books related to cannabis and or CBD. And this is our second book club. I'm so excited to have Lizzie Post. Look at my copy. You think I took notes?
Really? Notes.
I took notes so everybody else didn't have to. Higher Etiquette is the name of the book. And if you have attended our previous book club, virtual book club, you know that this is not really a webinar format. We're not going to show any slides. We just talk about the book, talk as authors, because both of us are authors, and just have a conversation. Ciara has come in. Hi there. Type in where you're from. Where are you from? Let us know where you're listening in from or watching from. So I was saying this is very casual, informal, and it's just a chance for us to hear from authors who have written books that are transforming the way we live, transforming the way we understand cannabis, transforming the way we understand wellness, because that's an ever-evolving thing as our world evolves and society and stressors evolve for all of us. So on that note, hi, Lizzie.
Hi.
So for those who don't know Lizzie's background, it's quite interesting. Lizzie, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and give some context of your background that makes Cannabis Etiquette book that much more relevant. So who are you, and so this is what publishers ask. Why are you qualified to write this book?
Why you? So my family has been America's go-to source for etiquette advice, general etiquette advice, for almost the past century. My great-great-grandmother was a woman by the name of Lizzie Post, and she became very famous in her 50s. So when she had already had a whole life, pretty much. I mean, she had gotten married, had 2 kids, gotten divorced, all, at the very early 1900s, and began a writing career. And in her 50s, she ended up writing about the topic etiquette, and she just became a really popular source for it. She had a really successful radio show at a time when there was quite higher numbers of illiteracy. And so having access to her advice via radio really meant a lot more people could access her advice. Though she started out really writing about more kind of high society lifestyles and societal norms for high society, she then branched further into kind of more everyday American etiquette as something that's more accessible to everyone. And she really became this American figure on this subject. And our family has carried on her work for the past 5 generations. And so we've got, we are in the 19th edition of her main book, Etiquette. And we have lots of spin-off topics, and it was really exciting to introduce Higher Etiquette to the world. It's our Cannabis Etiquette book, and it came out this spring in 2019. And it was really fun for our family to get to write about the topic. It's certainly something we've been familiar with, and it's really, really nice to broach that subject with people, because cannabis culture, even during times of prohibition, is just so deeply rooted in sharing and generosity and kindness and helping one another. And that makes for such a wonderful landscape for etiquette and for thinking about how we treat each other. And when you take something like cannabis and you legalize it and you allow people to participate with it, that means that any home you go into, it may or may not be a part of the dynamics and the offerings at that household. And whether you consume it or not, whether you only consume CBD, whether you love THC, like no matter how you choose to participate or not participate with it, it's going to be something you have to navigate with the people around you. And what we consider our job at the Emily Post Institute is really helping folks make choices about how they navigate socially that that considers the other people and the other parties in the scenario. So whether that's the environment, whether that's, you know, animals, whether that's people, you know, you really want to look around at the whole scenario that you're in and how your actions are going to impact it.
So
it's like modern day etiquette, I guess.
Yeah, it's very modern day etiquette, and yet rooted in the principles and even sort of an evolution of manners from the old days. I mean, there's things that just last.
Yeah.
But hold on one second. Before we really dive into the book, I want to know a little bit more about, I love the story of how you got this book deal for a book on essentially weed etiquette.
Yeah, totally. No, and that's what it got pitched as. I'm working on another book right now. It's an Audible original with the author Kelly Williams Brown. And it's a book it's called Mistakes Were Made. And it's all about just horribly embarrassing social moments that you've had, that you've lived through. And kind of this chance to just laugh at them and just say like, oh my gosh, that's mortifying. Like what could you have done? Like what would have changed so that you didn't end up in that situation? Or what do you wish was different about it? Just taking a moment and just laughing at some of the ridiculousness. And that book meant that Kelly and I, like our agents had met each other, and, you know, we were all just getting to know each other through the start of that book becoming a real deal. And Kelly's agent wrote an email to the two of us, to Kelly and myself, and she had like no reasons to include me on it whatsoever. But she said, hey, I know of a publisher who's looking to do a book on weed etiquette. Do you know any particularly conscientious pot smokers? And I was just like, oh, right here. Right here. I could write that book. I could do that book. And she was like, oh my gosh, the Emily Post Institute wouldn't do it though, right? And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure we would. And I talked with the family and they all agreed that with enough states having legalized and with the subject just being one that more and more people are being confronted with, that it was actually, you know, the right time and with the right audience to go into the topic and really explore it and look at it from this framework of consideration, respect, and honesty in our behavior. Those are sort of the three principles of etiquette that we work with at Emily Post and at the Emily Post Institute. And it's been so amazing to be in that space because they connected so well. I mean, I just, from whether you're living in a state of prohibition or whether you're living in a legalized state, I feel like cannabis consumers, for the most part, care about respecting their interactions with one another, because either it's a delicate thing and you have to be really worried about your safety and just how you're handling
privacy
and privacy and all of that, or it's legal but it's still a delicate thing and people are wanting to be careful about discretion and they're just kind of tiptoeing around things, trying to navigate. It's not like a full-on in your face, you know, weed free-for-all, you know. And so it's interesting just to see that no matter which space you're in, etiquette really played a role, and it really was about being thoughtful of the people around you, being thoughtful of the impact of what you're doing may have on the people around you. And that's just a beautiful space to work in, because oftentimes I'm in the space of, you know, like, people are rude on Facebook and you should tell them not to be. And like, you know, people just wanting you to scold everybody and unleash their pet peeves and be so frustrated with things. And you're like, that's a lot of energy.
So, okay. So going back to you getting this book deal, you raising your hand, I do want to point out, because I think this is, again, before we dive right into the contents of the book that you are a cannabis consumer, and you
Yeah.
have been for a good amount of time. And so you came to this not just as somebody with a family history and sort of ingrained with etiquette, but
Yeah.
also with a personal. So can you talk a little bit more about where you personally were coming from as you approached this book?
Yeah, I was always drawn to pot way more than alcohol. And it definitely featured as the relaxation, the celebration like element of choice for me. And so with both of those things in hand, it was something I was really familiar with. And I went through a couple different periods in my life where I chose not to be on any substances at all. And so that's also, and I really liked those periods of life. I also felt really comfortable when I brought pot and when I brought alcohol back into my life. So for me, it was something I kind of felt like I had been in a lot of different positions with it, both heavy regular user with a really high tolerance, a lightweight weekend user at times, and a complete abstainer at other times. And so that was my own just personal story with it. I never really thought of my use as medicinal. So I don't have a med card or anything like that. And I do think it has wonderful benefits on my body. Like I do believe that. So I can, even though I might not be actively using it medicinally, I think I might very well be receiving many medical benefits from it.
And also emotional, mental kind of benefits too. The
Yeah.
reduction of anxiety,
Yep.
sleeping better, depending on how much you take.
I do see a therapist, and we talk, like I'm fine sharing this, but like we talk about times where I'm consuming versus times where I'm not, and what the difference between the two is. And the other day she just shared the perspective that she said, there is kind of a lightness to you when it's something that you're engaging with. And she said, I noticed that. And she said, it's not like you're like different in how you respond heavily, but it's like, it does seem like it's a little, like everything's a little lighter for you. It doesn't have to feel quite so heavy all the time.
Heavy and intense.
Yeah. And I think that
Yeah.
that's nice. I think it's why I seek it out at times, but that's about as far as I'll go into like my own, down the rabbit hole of therapy and pot and
Sure,
how does
sure.
it make you feel and why do you do it? Because I also think that for me, a big reason that I'm attracted to it is that I love the smells and the science behind it. I loved joining you for your webinars with Emma Chasen.
I was just gonna bring her up too
She's
because
my favorite
I was
person.
like, Emma, we love Emma so much. Yes, I was so happy to see her name in your book.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is something, and I'm the same way. There's something. There's a little mystery, a little magic, a little science, a little experiential, visceral
Yeah.
thing about it.
Well, and I'm into other herbs too, like I love my herbal teas. I mix from, different herbs and flowers and things. And I like that part of interacting with nature in our world.
Yeah.
And so for me, cannabis is just another version of that. And it has so many different smells and tastes. And like one of the strains I grew had a really spicy flavor to it that I just wasn't that familiar with. I hadn't found that in many dispensaries in my travels, but this one version of homegrown seems to have it, and it's interesting and different, and I can't tell if I like it or not. And like, so it's like a whole new adventure, much like with cooking. So
Yeah,
for me,
exactly. Well,
but it's like, yeah.
it's interesting you said that you grow too, because that was another thing that
Yep.
that adds to who you are as the author of this book. So
Yeah.
again, the book is Higher Etiquette, for those of you who might be just tuning in on Facebook. And let's dive into the book. So here, my first thought was Higher Etiquette, a book about cannabis etiquette, weed. Oh, I bet it's going to be really tongue-in-cheek, like really cheeky and really humorous and all. I found it to be easy reading,
Good.
but quite serious is the wrong word, because it's not dry and it's not boring and it's not, it
Keep
was,
going. This is all great. I'm liking all the things you're saying. Please, more.
okay, but what I found it to be is it was really informative and educational. And so I was thinking in comparison to our book. So I know I have copies here somewhere. Hold on.
We should say we are of the same publisher. It was really fun to discover this.
That
like,
was
between
10
us. I was
Speed
like,
Press.
oh my gosh, we're of one.
10 Speed Press. We're part of the same family.
We are.
I began thinking as I'm reading your book that our books go hand in hand.
They really do.
In the perfect way, as if we were sitting in the room with each other as we were writing our books.
Yep.
I consider our book to be foundational.
I do too.
So it lays the groundwork for a deeper understanding of everything from history to botany to chemistry to interactions, right?
You went the step further that the publisher was like, you don't need to write about that. You're an etiquette book, Lizzie.
But it was so good that it was in here. It was so good.
But yeah, like we do the just gloss over version, and I wanted us to be able to have books like yours to refer to. I wish we had known when we were writing them, because that would have been great cross-reference.
It would have been really good. Exactly.
Your book is the one where it's like, my book stops at, if you want to know more, you know what I mean? And then it's like, go turn to this book, because it really will fill in the more scientific blanks and like the more process breakdowns. And I think that kind of stuff is really important when you're dealing with a substance as complex as cannabis is, because it is really complicated.
It is. And so this is a very easy read. I didn't feel it was glossed over, but I felt it was just those bite-sized pieces that you need to have that understanding. But you're right. Then you dive deeper into our book. But your book is the culture. It's sort of laying that larger picture groundwork, and then our book is let's dig in and use it for health and wellness.
Yes.
So that was one of my first thoughts as I was kind of going through this, going, oh my gosh, you've got a section on cannabinoids, a section on terpenes, and then you have a section on strains, which was really cool because we didn't go there. We were sort of strain agnostic.
Yeah.
But you talk about actual strains and effects. So that was one thing. The next thing that I was really thinking is how interesting it was for you to translate. So this is what I wrote down. Two things. First, explaining manners versus principles.
Oh, yeah.
And then explaining what the principles of etiquette in the book Etiquette, the Emily Post book Etiquette, everything based on, is it respect, consideration, honesty?
Yep, those are the three. Yep.
And then there's 4 that are the etiquette of cannabis: respect, generosity, gratitude, and sharing. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So now that I've sort of stated all of that, could you start with explaining the difference between manners and principles, just from etiquette?
Sure.
And then we'll move into the specific principles of cannabis etiquette.
Sure. So at the Emily Post Institute, we talk about etiquette as being made up of manners and principles. And it was like everyone wants etiquette to just be kind of like these rules, but things change over time. And yet there's also this general sense of being good to one another that doesn't change over time. So we started to really unpack that as a business, and we came up with that really manners change over time and that they vary by culture. And the best example that I can give you of a manner is that in the United States, the handshake is the very classic greeting. That over in many European countries, you'll see variations of kiss on the cheek as being a very familiar greeting. and that in many cultures over in Asia, you have like different degrees of bowing, and also of the bringing together of hands that make for greetings and goodbyes, and that they show different levels of respect. And they all convey a sense of welcome and respect and understanding that you're coming together to meet in some way of getting to know one another, that you're not enemies. And that's really fascinating because the outward expression of it, the behavior of it, is different across all of those cultures. And it's changed over time. Think about the hug as a greeting 4 years ago versus even in the past 2 years. You know what I mean? It's interesting to see the differences in women over the years who, it's very rare, but every now and again, you'll meet a woman who still does not shake hands. And that's not necessarily like a cultural difference so much as it is a time difference here in the United States.
Generational or something?
Generational difference, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like it was a very small period, but there was a period of time where women did not shake hands, and it was considered, you know, very ladylike to not shake someone's hand. And then it became very ladylike to choose whether or not you shook the hand. And then it was like, just everybody shake hands, but you'd have to remember that there were generations of people who still didn't do it. And so manners to me are really fascinating because they do come and go throughout history. We don't have chaperones anymore, but we do have cell phones. And those are like huge impacts on our behavior and on how we're seen in public. And so manners are really fascinating, but they change over time. They also do these two great things. They let us know what to expect from others, and they let us know what we should be doing in a given situation. So when you're here in the States and you do reach out a hand to someone, they know what you're doing. They know that you're reaching out for a handshake. They reach back out and shake your hand. It's amazing. You do it and they do it, and it like just happens. It's so great.
It's like a cultural norm. Manners become a cultural norm, right?
They become a cultural norm, but they change over time. Principles, on the other hand, the principles of etiquette we've kind of discussed a couple times today, and those we believe are consideration, respect, and honesty. And when we are considering the people around us, we're acknowledging that our behavior is going to have an impact on them. And if we're really thoughtful, we're also thinking of things like, okay, and if this is a business situation, my company's reputation is a part of, you know, is impacted by what I do, you know? So there are also kind of things that aren't just the people present in the moment that we want to be aware of when it comes to the situations that we're in. But we think about who's involved and how they're affected. We then think about respecting each person in the situation by acknowledging that we may have multiple options for how to solve these problems, but those options are going to impact the other players positively and negatively. And that's respecting the fact that these humans are going to be impacted by us, and determining whether or not we are positively impacting or negatively impacting. I think that's where we then are making really honest decisions about what we're doing, where we're saying, okay, I'm making a decision and I can honestly say it's going to impact these people this way because I've taken this time to think about it. That was a really long process that I just described. The amazing thing is that it happens in like a fraction of a second. You do it all the time naturally when you are behaving really well and solving problems really well. And it's amazing because it's in each of us to be able to do it really, really well, and to take the time to think about it, even that fraction of a second to think about it. But when we don't, that's when you start to see rudeness, and rudeness creates stress, which creates more rudeness. And this is when you feel a culture that feels really tense and frustrated, where people are more reactive on a regular basis. And
there's more conflict.
There's a lot more conflict. And so you need to feel like you can solve that conflict. And I am, you know, incredibly grateful for the job that I do, because it reminds me all the time, even when I'm having my worst days. And let me tell you, I snap at people, I get mad, I get frustrated, I don't do the right thing, I have to issue apologies, like, you know, I'm a human being. And having the reminder of the idea that you think about who's involved and how they're affected, whether or not what you're going to do is going to positively or negatively impact them, and try to make choices that allow you to behave in ways that are genuine, that you can feel honest about the decision you made. I think that encouragement, I'm really grateful to have that as a business that I get to be a part of and remind myself of. I mean, it's awful when someone wants to hold you to task on it and be like, you're the etiquette person, you should be better.
Not be rude.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
and they're right.
So let's take this to cannabis then.
Yeah. Okay.
So manners and principles. So the book, after all of that foundational overview of the different aspects of cannabis as a plant and the parts of it, you do move into situations and manners. But let's start with those 4 principles of cannabis etiquette.
Yeah, totally.
And then let's give some examples of situations and manners. So the 4 principles again, on my little sticky note.
I love it.
Respect, generosity, gratitude, and sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, before we dive into these, which are super important and will frame the rest of this conversation, who did you interview for this book? What kind of people were the ones that were giving you all of the feedback?
I think I did like almost 100 interviews for the book. So I had a very short time to write the book. I signed the contract in late December of 2017, and I needed to deliver a manuscript by, I think the deadline was like May 1st or May 4th or something like that. And so, so I had 4 full months to research and write the book. And I got on the phone and just started, I called friends and asked them if they knew dispensary owners or cannabis growers or, people who did other things in the industry. And through doing that, I managed to fill up 4 months worth of time, but got connected to a lot of different people. People who, like I said, owned dispensaries, owned grow operations, who were home growers themselves, just people who smoked it. And I tried to find people who smoked and consumed in all kinds of various ways. Only medicinal, only CBD, dabbers, vapors, people who only ate it. It was like I was really looking for everyone's method to make sure that I was covering the bases, because I smoke joints. That's what I do. Like, I don't really I don't think I even have a bong in my house. Like, I have owned them at various points, but like, that's been my thing. I haven't been huge into eating it myself. And so I didn't have the experience of throwing a dinner party where all the food was infused and figuring out what goes well and what doesn't go well with that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I needed to get on the phone and just talk to people who, consumed differently than I did, or for different reasons than I did. And who also entered into this community to, be in the industry and to find all the different types of jobs, from bed and breakfast owners to, even cannabis lawyers. And just, it was amazing kind of how many people, once you called someone, you kind of got more people, and, you just kept having people who helped you find other people that you should talk to. And it was a lot like that. And then whenever I was traveling for it, it was the people I was sitting next to on the airplane, the person on the train, the person, like at the cafe next to you. It was, it kind of became, every conversation I had connected to it somehow for a solid 4 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because as I was reading it, and some people do, and some people say, I was wondering who those some people were.
Oh yeah.
All right.
There were a lot of some people.
Lots of some people. Gotcha. Yeah. Respect, generosity, gratitude, and sharing. Now, you have talked a lot about respect already, the respect of other people, understanding how what you say and do impacts them. Generosity. Can you speak a little bit to the generosity of cannabis, the aspect of cannabis?
I think this is one of those, at the heart of the cannabis community. I am just so amazed at how it is still, I mean, in the days of Prohibition, you understood where the generosity came from, because we all know what it's like to go without. When you can't find it and you really do want it, or let's say you can't find it and you really do need it. It's a really, it's a community that I've always found that even if someone doesn't have you know, back in the day, I need to sell you or I need to give to you to take away, they'll at least try to consume some with you. You know what I mean? I found that that was always true. People were always willing to give, even that, you know, the very classic image of, you know, a joint passed at a concert, you know, even that is a generous act when you're sharing that with people. And so that seemed, it was just such a theme with everybody that I talked to. They talked about giving weed away. They talked about being grateful when they received it. And that to me, it was so strong a theme. It was as strong as the very classic, like, cannabis etiquettes that people would talk about, like not burning an entire bowl, but saving fresh green for someone else, you know, like that was something almost every single person mentioned, as well as mentioning things like, oh, when someone gives it to you, it's the best, or, you know, you always try to share what you have.
So tell me a little bit of the difference between generosity versus sharing.
Yeah. And this is why I had there was so many drafts where those got merged together and then they got pulled apart.
Pulled apart again. Yeah.
You could have done it either way, I think. But for me, the generosity was also a generosity of spirit, to share knowledge. And also to be literally generous with your spirit when you're consuming with other people. People don't really try to be, it's funny how, like, people don't really try to be jerks when they're high together. You know what I mean? It's like, whereas the same can't be said of once you've consumed too much alcohol. You know what I mean? It's like, I was laughing. There was one of the wineries out in Sonoma County was saying that they really love that they've opened up a portion of their land to cannabis, and they have cannabis tours come through, and they say everyone who comes through who's been consuming pot is just, they're all so mellow and chill and grateful and kind and nice. And, you know, when the people who are coming through on the wine tours have had too much, like, you can kind of tell, and it's a bummer. And it was an interesting, I don't always like pitting the two against each other because I'm a fan of wine, you know,
but of course
it was a cute sort of difference between the two.
But there's also a physiological difference in terms of what the different chemicals do to us, to our bodies, and to our brains. And so it's not just societal or attitudinal. It is absolutely physiological in terms of the differences.
There's something about that seems to bring out a real spirit of generosity in people. Where
it's communal.
It's communal. And I also think that even, and this was what was hysterical to me, but even in like behavioral correction. So when someone would say, you know, like, hey man, you're holding on to the joint, like, you can say it like that and the other person isn't getting terribly offended. Like, there's a lot of generosity in the etiquette and the effect. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm going too far with it, but it really was impressive, because if you were at a dinner party and someone was like, don't chew your steak like that, or why are you cutting like that, or why did you pass the rolls to the left instead of the right, like, we'd be like, what are you doing? Like, stop. You know what I mean?
That's just wrong.
Yeah, exactly. But in the same as like when it comes to sharing knowledge, and I hear people, I heard so many people, especially who had been in states that had legalized for quite some time, they were really, really generous with how they talked about growing and how they talked about their preferences around cannabis or their boundaries around cannabis. There was a generosity in that, to the idea that there might be other opinions. People might not be where they're at in their learning about cannabis. And so it was a generosity of spirit that went beyond just giving weed to people and being generous about that. So the sharing came in with the idea of, you know, really when we're sharing it with someone, first of all, there is a lot of behavioral exchange in that, you know, and depending on the way that you consume, that's gonna have different kind of societal parameters to it, in terms of what's acceptable. You and I think, are of both of the mindset that you don't just give someone an edible and not tell them that you've done that. You know what I mean? Like, really, you know, but we're in our mind of okay behavior, that's like not okay behavior.
Right.
There are other people who aren't in that space. And you know, whether you're meeting them in that space, whether you're educating in that space, whether you're politely ignoring in that space, you know, depends on the moment. But it's interesting to think about when we go to share this together, what are the acceptable ways to do that that can allow people to be safe, can allow people to feel comfortable? When we come at it from an etiquette standpoint, that's what we're looking for. How are you making people comfortable, allowing them to make choices for themselves? These are the themes of etiquette today in terms of how we interact when people are such individuals.
And allow them also the space for their own privacy and for their own ability to refuse without you feeling offended, to give them space to be comfortable in the space. And then also to know when, maybe if they've declined, to pull back a little and say, oh, you know what, we don't have to do this right now, to give them super comfort around that. I'm just reminded of yesterday. Oh,
like, hey, it's really important. It's really, really important.
Yeah, because that to me is more than anything. So two things. One, a general thing about Ellementa. So the company that I co-founded with Melissa Pierce and Ashley Kingsley, where we partner with women locally to bring women together to talk about cannabis. And some of the instructions that we give to women, recommendations, suggestions, is just be very sensitive to the fact that you're going to have different women with different experiences with cannabis, including some who are going to be afraid to walk through that door because they're going to think it's just a bunch of stoner women who are smoking a lot of pot. It's going to be smoky. Well, we're a non-consumption event.
Yeah.
And we attract easily the cannabis user who's like, oh, a cannabis thing for women, cool.
Yeah.
But also that woman who is like, oh my God, is this okay? Can I do this? It's just been made legal, but is it really legal? Is it safe?
Yeah.
And so that awareness of that space and creating that space, I think this is cannabis etiquette, where you are respectful, right? I never thought of it as cannabis etiquette. I just thought of it as community building, being a good host, and creating a space for all those different layers, all those different experiences, all those different visceral emotional reactions, and just being aware so that the new user feels just as comfortable as the experienced user, that you can all be in the same room. There's no judgment. No mocking someone for being afraid.
Yeah. No, it is exactly what you're talking about. That is the goal of etiquette, is to make the people around you feel comfortable, you know, as they are. You're not trying to change them. You're not trying to force them into a situation that they're not going to be comfortable in. And I think a lot of cannabis communities, especially who are legalizing, are really feeling those social questions getting asked. Oh my gosh, wait, I was at my friend's party and she was growing plants in the backyard, and my kid is like really into gardening and asked me about the plants, and I froze, like, you know. And it's you hear stories like that all the time, especially during the earlier days of legalization in a community. You know, people don't know if it's okay to talk about in front of minors. They don't know if it's okay to ask their friend if they can smoke a joint, you know, in the backyard while everyone else is having cocktails. You know, they don't know if it's okay. And I think we really want to invite the conversation to open up and say, well, yeah, it's okay, but you got to be prepared for the rejection side of it too. Just like you were just saying, we have to be prepared to get no's and to be able to move graciously through that space when we do, you know. I mean, I had a man at I was at the National Stationery Show, and, you know, this was one of the first times where we were really super public facing with both our cannabis etiquette book, Higher Etiquette, and the rest of our books. And it was really fun for me. I loved, you know, getting to do both conversations, like in the same booth simultaneously, no separation. It was great. But I had one guy just pick up the cannabis book, and he was like, oh, pot just makes you stupid. And like, right, I I don't think I'm stupid. And like, I like, and you know, I smoke pretty darn regularly. And I was just sitting there going, you know, this is that moment that I talk about all the time where you could be really offended and be like, wow, you have no right to say that to me, you know? But at the same time, that was not the path I wanted to go down. I would, you know, it's not the version of myself I want to be all the time. And so instead I said, oh, well, you know, tell me what makes you say that, you know, like talk to me about it. He goes, oh, it just makes you so lazy and so tired and so this and so that. And I was like, oh, well, I said, you know, we've got really different perspectives on it, but that's some of what you'll learn about in that book if you're interested. If not, we have all these books over here, you know. But it's like, you know, I didn't feel the need to have to prove in that moment to him that, like, you know, I'm a walking contradiction to what you're saying, sir, you know. But it's you know, I still wanted to say, like, my perspective on that is different, like, but we don't have to go there. Like,
So one of the things that was in the book that is something as a mom, I sort of live and experience and am always kind of keenly aware. You know, if there is cannabis in the home, what is the appropriate way of approaching that from either the standpoint of the mom whose kid's going to go over to someone else's home and you're kind of aware that they probably have cannabis there or are wondering if they do, what is there. And here in Alaska, the conversation also might be about guns, to tell you the truth, because everyone has guns.
Very similar idea.
It's very similar. Or if you are the host family and a kid is coming over to your house and then the mom or the dad wants to know, I mean, what is the polite way for that kind of interaction?
We talk about this one in the book, and it's a really interesting conversation because there's, I mean, the two sides that we often hear are, I really need to know about my child's safety and the environments that they're going to be in. That's me being a responsible parent. And then you also hear the other side of it, that it's nobody else's business. You're not asking me where the, you know,
where the liquor is,
chemicals are, where the liquor is, where my Xanax is. Like, you're not asking me about the Ambien I take. You're not, which, you know, can lead to like driving in the middle of your sleep, like
naked driving.
According to HBO. But no, it's really, it's really interesting when you stop and ask yourself, why is the cannabis the concern? If I'm a parent of a teen and my teen has shown interest in getting my own cannabis, or, you know what I mean? If this was a problem with my kid and I was wanting to know or to make the issue aware and say, hey, look, this has been an issue with my kid and I'm worried he's going to try or she's going to try to, or they're going to try to find it at your house, just a heads up. That's a very different conversation from, I'm worried my 5-year-old might eat the edible that you have, which is a really valid and concerning thing too. And so you get into this space where parents are both concerned and not concerned, and they're concerned about some things but not other things, and you can't always tell why. And that for me brings us to a place of, okay, this is personal. This is really personal. And that's why it can feel so charged and it can feel so offensive when we're on one side or the other and we get shut down or we've hurt someone else just by trying to ask a question. And when we come up with topics like that in etiquette, one of the spaces we really go to is to start by asking permission to have a conversation and admit that you have some things you would like to talk about if the other person is open and willing. And that's the way you want to begin that conversation. What you don't want to do is ask straight out, you know, do you have pot at your house, because I have a boundary. I think that really puts someone on the spot. We have to remember that for some people, cannabis is a medicinal issue only. And therefore it's actually none of your business, just the same way the Xanax or the Prozac or the Ambien is none of your business. And that puts it in an also strange category for people because they don't know how to kind of rectify those two things. Something they feel they should be able to have an opinion about, which is whether or not their kid is around cannabis, and someone else's medicinal usage and medical private life. So it gets messy very quickly depending on what it is. But what I like about asking permission to ask about the topic is that I can then say, let's say it is medicinal for me, and I am the type of person that just doesn't, I don't want to have to talk to you about that. I shouldn't have to talk to you about that at all. I can say, you know, do you mind letting me know the topic? And if you say it's cannabis, I'll say, I'd rather not have that conversation with you. Let's have the kids play somewhere other than my house.
Oh, nice. Okay.
You know, that's, that gives you an avenue. When you start to remember that the person who's worried about it, you can always just say, okay, then the play dates have to be at your house only. I hope you're okay with that, you know, or play dates at your house or a third party location, you know, like the park or the school or whatever it is. But I think when you try to find solutions rather than just focusing on the potential of the offense or the way that you don't get along, I think about parents who do have to ask, for instance, if your kid is vaccinated or not, because their child has an immune issue that doesn't allow them to get vaccinated. Therefore, they can't be around kids who aren't vaccinated, or they're at least supposed to be really careful about that. I have a close friend who deals with this, and they just simply have to say, we, unfortunately, due to health reasons, we have a question we have to ask. And if the answer is no, it really sucks, because we can't then at this stage of her life allow you guys to allow them to play. And that's that's how they approach something that is a personal topic, that's a medical topic, that's a difficult topic, that is a topic that has a lot of opinion attached to it.
Yeah, very charged topic.
Whoa, I mean, that's a heavy one when you start breaking out the vaccine question, you know what I mean? And yet it's something that they do have to be cautious of. Whenever any kid gets sick at that child's daycare, this child has to go home for the day too. They can't, there's no, it's really
that serious and intense.
Dealt with. Yeah. And so we have these subjects that we have to do it around. And I think it's really good to ask ourselves whether or not cannabis really is that subject for us, or whether we're just nervous about it because we don't know as much. And attending a group like an Ellementa group, or going to an educational seminar, or signing up for a webinar might help us understand more, to at least alleviate base fears, or to ask better questions. Maybe not to ask whether or not you use, but just to ask, hey, can I just ask that if you have cannabis in your home, do you just make sure it's stored properly? You know what I mean? Just
that it's locked up and secure.
Yeah, it's the same question we've given people the framework to ask about guns. Is it locked up and secure? I'm just trying to, and people, you've got to remember, people can lie to you. They can tell you whatever they want.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Sometimes when I've asked parents about this question, they say, I don't ask the question because I would expect someone to just tell me what I want to hear anyway, So you hear that side of it too. I have family members that have guns, and I've asked them, has another parent ever asked you about whether or not you have guns in the home? And they say no one's ever asked them. So it's interesting to hear the different levels of, boy, that sounds like a good thing to be concerned about. I am concerned about that. I have this thing and I never hear anybody ask me about it. I don't know that I don't know what I would answer if they did. Like, it's been very interesting to hear, if you go down the rabbit hole of this really tough question and you don't do it well, where it goes. And also and also, even if you do it well, are you getting truthful answers you don't know? You know what I mean? And so it's
complicated, as they say.
It's really complicated when we think about answering it. It's why we pull way, way, way back, and we say, okay, let's start at the beginning. Do I have your permission to talk to you about this? Because this is a tough one, and you might have reservations that would be understandable. And if that's the case, we just need to figure out how to have the play date so that we both feel okay about it.
So how do you have the infused dinner? From the standpoint of the host,
different conversation.
It is, exactly. So so from the standpoint of the host, because I thought about doing something like that. I have to first navigate my household and figure out, is that appropriate at this stage and at the ages everyone's at, and where could they go and how could that be handled? But then from an attendee, if I go to someone's home, particularly some people do organize infused meals. You go, you know that's happening. Other times you show up and one of the offerings is something infused.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the manners around that. And just for time, so you know, we've got about 10 more minutes. If anyone has any questions right now, feel free to type them in, and I'll try to get those to Lizzie. But this is a situation I think people are going to encounter more and more and more with legalization.
The one that you described where you go to someone's house and it's just a part of the offerings, I think it'll definitely be there. And both in the form of just like, oh, we have, you know, weed to offer just like we have alcohol to offer, you know, but also in the form of that, like, you know, proverbial plate of brownies, like that's just always around, right? And I do still, it's really funny, but I do still hear more of that, like, you know, oh, and then someone brought out a plate of infused brownies, like more than any other thing still. It's those brownies.
Still those brownies.
Still those brownies.
Or cookies. It could also be cookies, but brownies.
Cookies, but it's usually baked good. And so,
it's baked good.
but I do think that, so as the host, I think it's really important to, if you're doing more than just the one small side offering, I would really make sure people know what they're walking into. Even with the one small side offering, like in a legalized state, I think if it's kind of that small a part of everything and that kind of discreetly a part of everything, I mean, everything needs to be labeled. You need to be making sure people know what dosage they're getting and what the outcome's going to be. All of those things I think are just, they're safety precautions that we just take as hosts. And it's really important that we do that. But beyond that, you know, it's funny, I go back and forth as to whether or not you're responsible as the host for telling people up front, oh, and there's going to be some infused food like that's available if you want it. I think you tell people when there's going to be a lot of heavy smoking going on, especially in a smaller indoor space or you know, where that is going to be a part of the environment. But it's funny how much I'm like, you know, for the edibles, like as long as the person coming could go through the whole night without engaging with them, I think that it's less of a necessity to upfront tell people. But then you start getting into the fact, well, when people start eating infused food, if they metabolize quickly, then they're high. And if you don't like being around people who are high, is it up to the host to then let each guest know when they show up or when they RSVP, that there might be a chance that they'll be around people who are high? I don't know. I don't know whether that's necessary.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I don't get told like, hey, by the way, there's going to be drinking at this party. There's
going to be some drunk people.
Yeah. And like, same, I think about things like no one says like, there's going to be gluten at the party. Like, you know what I mean? Like there are other things that impact people in ways that we don't bring up and that we just say, okay, I live in a legalized society for alcohol. So when I show up at a party, there may be alcohol, there may not. I just take that as a given. I'm curious how long it's going to take us to get to the point where that's true with cannabis, where it's like, you just know to ask about food before you eat it, just in case, you know, or you just assume that people like that they may or may not be smoking in the house or on the porch. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how long.
So just kind of closing out this hosting and being at somebody's house or at a party, in terms of alcohol, as a host, we should take a certain amount of responsibility if somebody became too drunk to take their car keys. Or to offer for them to stay over, offer them the guest room. So some people can get extremely high and be quite out of it. So I'm thinking, what was that?
For hours. I mean, it can be hours.
It could be hours, exactly.
Symptoms, yeah.
So that not only safety, but that should be an etiquette consideration where, how do you handle that with cannabis? The same way?
This is the same thing, is that you as the host are often, especially from an insurance standpoint, you are responsible for your guests and what you serve them. So it's important to keep tabs on your guests and to kind of monitor how sober they are. And if you don't feel comfortable letting them drive home, you do everything you can to make sure that you do that. Um, and we do have a question at the
Yeah,
end.
I was just going to say, I was just getting ready. Well, you know what? Okay. Did you
You do
finish your
everything
thought?
you can. Yeah, you do everything you can. You let them stay the night if you can. You get them in a cab home. You ask somebody to get them home, or you yourself get them home. But you do what you can to make sure people aren't on the roads, that they're not, taking on situations that aren't going to be safe. And I say that because even sometimes for someone walking home, making them walk home when they're drunk isn't safe.
Right.
Sometimes making them walk home when they're high isn't safe. So be really,
Mm-hmm.
really conscious of that.
Yep. So here's the question. I'm going to read that for you. I'm a medical smoker and a mom to a preteen, and I have friends that now call me a stoner, which tends to upset me. I do like to get high, but I mainly smoke CBD strains. How do I explain, or should I, that I don't like being called names and that it is medicinal and that I need it and I'm not a stoner? I want my son to view it as medical.
I
A
think
good one.
that's, yeah, no, it's a good question. And this is the whole stereotype and stigma issue that we are really hoping, as more and more people come forward and say that they are, cannabis consumers, that it helps broaden the perspective of what it looks like to consume cannabis. And there are a lot of people that are with you that either only consume CBD or even consume THC, and they don't appreciate being called a stoner. And it's really important that we recognize that different words are sensitive to different people. And I think that one of the things you can choose what fits your personality in terms of how you respond. Some people are really great at just confronting something they don't like right then and there. And when someone says to them, "Oh, you're such a stoner," you say, "Actually, I smoke CBD and it's for medicinal reasons. So I really don't appreciate being called a stoner." And I tell you that once or twice of that, and word will get out that you are not a stoner and that this is not appreciated. And
It's not
um,
appropriate. It's not
it's
even
not
just not appreciated.
appropriate.
It's just not
Yeah,
appropriate. They're being rude.
right. And you might not feel comfortable doing that to someone. You might not feel comfortable saying it that way. So you might go the route of asking a couple of your really close friends to spread the word. And you might have a more a quiet conversation with them privately where you say, there is something that's really been bothering me, and I'm hoping you can help me out with it, because
Mm.
I'm not quite of the personality where I'm going to like tell someone off in the moment, and I don't feel comfortable doing that. But it really bothers me that our friend group looks on this as me being a stoner. I really don't identify that way. This is my reason for using, this is what I use. It's really different from what they think. And I don't know how to change that other than to let people know I just don't appreciate it. And, that's another angle to go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Well,
then
people aren't saying to you, you're a lush because you
yeah,
like wine.
no, they're
It's sort of
not.
comparable to that.
A little bit, yeah. And the other thing that's really frustrating about this particular one for me is that this is someone's medical choice. She doesn't have to be acknowledging that to anybody else. That's her own private business. And I think that that's another avenue you can go. It tends to put a little bit more distance in the conversation when you put up that medical wall and just say, that's my medical choice. I really don't appreciate you talking about it. You can feel that distance that you create with
It
it.
pushes people away a bit.
That for some people, that's what they want with their medical private life, and that's the avenue they need to explore. So like I said, depending on your personality, depending on your comfort level with what you're sharing, you're going to take different actual avenues with this particular situation. But it is a really tough one, and I am sorry that people are in the stage of familiarity with CBD and cannabis in your life where they are choosing to feel like it's okay to say those things to you. I really hope that books like Higher Etiquette, conversations like the ones that Ellementa bring to the table, especially in people's neighborhoods, and in smaller communities. I think the more that we're talking about it, the less you're going to have this experience in life. But it does take time. And we are working on 100 years of propaganda and negative stereotyping and stigmatization. And the other thing that I do always close any stoner conversation by saying is that remember too that there are also people that really proudly identify as stoners, and that the community of people who, you know, like get, you know, whether it's the Grateful Dead image of it, whether it's a, you know, just whatever image of it that you pick, that means stoner to you, that there are also people who really embrace that. And so we try to really let each individual.
Cheech and Chong, by the way.
Like exactly. Like
there are people who are like that, love it. It makes them laugh. They enjoy that. And they're not ashamed.
I'm one of them in many ways. I am very classic, and I would call myself a stoner most of the time. And so it's important to recognize that both those perspectives are really valid, and that there are certain words that tend to be a bit more charged around this subject, and we want to recognize that and give people the choice to identify or not identify as those words.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm the kind of person who would then sit down with my friends, because if they're my friends, they're going to hear me out and they're going to love and respect me. But I would sit down with my friends together, sort of as a group. I would be inclined to do a little bit of education, and then to be very frank about, you know, that particular word I don't think really does suit me. You might mean it with love and jokingly, but it does hurt my feelings. It could be a humorous thing. They might just think they're just teasing you. I was just having a conversation about teasing, and I say, you know, teasing is sort of covert cruelty, really. But some people have a higher tolerance for it, and some people think it's a sign of love. But I hate being teased, and so if I felt my friends were doing something that hurt my feelings, then I would want to, as a sort of a group of friends, let's come to an agreement. Don't call me stoner, because that hurts my feelings, and respect and understand what it is I'm doing and why, and know that I'm keeping things locked up and that your kid is safe. And for my own kids,
that's the other part of it.
So just sort of the whole thing, like, why are they saying this? And then the idea of kids, that was part of this question, was, yes, you want your child to know, to have a healthy attitude and to understand cannabis etiquette. Just like any kind of manners. It's the new sort of manners that you have to also take into account, and then just letting them know that, you know, this is a private matter for us, or this is a normal thing, or this is medicine for grown-ups, not for kids, whatever that framing that you want to have. But I think it's important for us and healthy for us to talk about our kids, not just about cannabis, the safety of it, the consumption of it, but the normalcy of it.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's why I don't like shushing the conversation. It's the best thing I just had this great experience, and then I promise I won't go too far over our time. But I was visiting family friends over summer vacation, and was in the household, and there were three generations of the family in the household, and the grandpa was talking about cannabis, and he loved the book, and we were talking about the book and everything. We kept using the word cannabis, and finally the grandson, he piped up and said, "What's cannabis?" And his dad said, "Oh, it's an herb that like adults use, and you'll make a decision about it for yourself when you're older." And it was just and then we just went right on with the conversation, and it
so
was
casual and normal and
easy,
everyday and easy. Wow.
It was really easy, and it felt really good, and it didn't feel like it was hiding it, but it also explained really quickly and concisely that this is something for adults, and it's like, just, you don't have to worry about this for a while, kid, you know, like, this is something for parents to think about, and that's it. And it was really easy. That's not going to be every conversation, but it's true. It was really good. So I think there are ways to talk about it with kids, and there are ways to also brush it off lightly, or to give small doses of information about it, you know, and lead it in that way. But it's a big topic.
It is a big topic. And the book is Higher Etiquette.
I know, so many notes.
Higher Etiquette by Lizzie Post. There's a lot of great information in here. It's a good introduction to cannabis itself. It's a great explanation of the evolution of attitudes towards cannabis, and some very specific guidance for different situations, from cannabis at work to cannabis amongst friends to cannabis infused dinners and entertaining.
Weed at weddings.
Weed at weddings.
Love that one.
You know, it's
Yeah.
it's a really cool book. And like I said, I do think, and I'm going to hold up mine again too, only because
Goes so well together.
they're like the perfect match. And it's also a really cool book with the illustration. So our book has gorgeous photos. 10
Yes.
Speed Press did an amazing job. Your book have these really fun illustrations, which I really liked it a lot. And the design of it too. The 10 Speed books are, I'm looking for this one illustration that I thought was really helpful. But in general, the 10 Speed books are beautiful. I mean, that's what they do.
And they do it at really good, I don't mean to like now get all salesy, but like they do it at a really good price point. Like this is under a $20 book, and that makes it like
and it's a hardcover.
And it's a hardcover, and it's like got a nice look, like it lasts. And for me, as someone who likes to keep very few books in my house, I like purchasing books that are gonna like stay around and look good, you know.
And I'm just showing right now this very illustrative, you know, here's your plant and then all the parts of the plant. I just love that. I thought they did a great job. All right, well, we are over time. I could talk to you forever.
I know. Let's do another one. We can talk about other parts of the book or growing.
Growing. Well, you know, growing is a topic that keeps coming up. We probably are going to be doing some webinars about growing, particularly growing in your home. And Ashley, one of my business partners, is growing a plant in her backyard. Nice. and going through that whole process.
Just harvested. It's so much fun. I love this time of year. It's great.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Lizzie, for being here. We will have you back. Absolutely. We'll probably be sending a couple more questions your way as we get more etiquette questions. But thanks everybody for being here, for watching this, and have a great rest of your weekend and week. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.